but you're still going to have them involved.
Got it.
Human beings are costly, there's no question about it. But on the other hand, having a machine fail because you didn't have a human being there is even more costly.
Some people would say machines don't have consciousness, and that's why you should have people up there, because you have this discernment factor. But then if you ask Ray Kurzweil, he'll tell you that machines have consciousness, so who knows?
Yeah, sometimes you think they do if you're trying to operate.
They take on a life of their own. Talk about space medicine and your experience on the moon and the microgravity environment, and what happens to an astronaut on the moon? What do they go through in their biology?
Well, we really don't know yet, because we have not spent the time, had the time on the moon, or developed the protocols when we had a little bit of time to really understand whether or not the moon, how different the moon is from the weightlessness of space itself. We know a lot about, not nearly enough, but we know a lot about the changes the human body goes through when it's exposed to weightlessness and the relatively high concentrations of oxygen. We don't know how that changes when the gravity is 1/6 rather than 0. And that's a very, very important thing to know. And if and when we finally do get back to the moon, it's one of the things that we've recommended very strongly when I was chair of the NASA Advisory Council, that we very early on try to understand if 1/6 gravity overcomes the adverse effects of adverse biological effects of weightlessness. If it does, then that changes the whole a lot of the engineering concepts one would use to work on Mars, because that means Mars will reset those and overcome those adverse consequences. If we find that 1/6 gravity is not enough, then we're going to have to design in our operations as well as hardware, I think, much differently for going to Mars. So that one factor of understanding the effect of 1/6 gravity on human biological function is a very, very critical, what they sometimes call Mars forward factor that we need to understand.
Why are we so interested in Mars? What is it about Mars?
Hey, because it's there.
How about the other ones? Pluto just got knocked off the whole grid out there. What happened?
That only in some people's minds. Let's face it. Mars is the next big goal in space. You don't know what you're. We didn't know we were going to find helium-3 concentrations on the moon worth thinking about either. That's the excitement and value of exploration, is you don't know what's going to be over the next hill.
The fluid shifts in your upper body. You have a loss of appetite. It's written that you have a decrease in bone density, a loss of muscle mass and heart mass. Your spine changes when you're in space. What happened to you on the moon? Did you feel anything different? Did you get sick to your stomach? Did you throw up? What happened to you?
No, the moon was a very comfortable place to be. And I think all of the astronauts have found that, and that's why I suspect that we're going, first we had 3.5 days to adapt to weightlessness on the way to the moon, and that's about what it takes to get over the immediate symptoms some of which you described. But on the moon, everybody felt good. The adrenaline was high, of course, and I have a feeling that 1/6 gravity starts to reset a lot of those adverse problems that we've seen in weightlessness. But we don't know that. We need to have that. And also, let's face it, neither the United States nor the then Soviet Union and now Russia have done a very good job of developing a very strong, rigorous research program for understanding not only the general space adaptation issues, but also individual variability in how adaptation occurs and variability in adverse consequences. I've been arguing with NASA for 40 years on that subject, and until we really put together a systematic protocol to understand the broad individual variations, we're going to be working partially in the dark on these kinds of subjects. For example, you talked about bone density changes. Well, generally, most astronauts and cosmonauts that have been examined for bone density changes do lose bone mineral mass with exposure to weightlessness. On the other hand, there are a few that don't.
Wow.
We need to understand that. We need to understand why some don't. And also we find that, and this is of very great interest to some researchers in the National Institutes of Health, we find that when healthy astronauts come back, even with a depleted bone mineral mass, they gradually replace it. Well, that doesn't happen in older people. And the NIH folks would really like to understand why that it works in astronauts and doesn't work in older people. So there's a great deal of, shall we say, feedback from what we learn about the human physiology in space that is going to affect our understanding of human physiology here on Earth.
I loved the part where you talked about NIH cooperating with NASA, but NASA hasn't been yet ready for that.
They certainly weren't at the time I wrote that book. During my tenure as the chairman of the NASA Advisory Council, through the efforts of Dr. Stephen Katz and Dr. David Longnecker, who were on the council, we were able to get a very strong working memorandum of understanding between the NIH and NASA, the first really good one that I think has ever been put together. Unfortunately, under the current administration, I'm not sure that's being pursued by NASA as it should.
Do you think that the current administration is shutting down funding for NASA because NASA's perceived as operating over budget and kind of runs fat, if you will, in the way it operates as an organization, and therefore it's seen as being non-fiscally responsible?
No. First of all, what they're shutting down is the funding for the previous administration's vision for returning to the moon and going on to Mars. That's what they're shutting down, and that's a political decision.
Okay.
And the money for NASA's budget is staying roughly the same, if not increasing a little bit, but they're transferring the money they're proposed to Congress to transfer the money that would have been used by Constellation to return to the moon over into a variety of other science as well as climate and other programs of that nature. It's a change of emphasis, not a change of funding.
Okay.
Now, they argue that the Constellation program was behind schedule and could not be implemented, could not be executed at the current levels of NASA's budget. Well, to some degree that was true, but that was true because, one, the Bush administration never provided the funds early on that were necessary to keep schedules, and two, the Congress had several continuing resolutions, each of which reduced NASA's budget automatically. And anytime you cut funding in an agency like NASA for a major engineering program, you have to stretch out schedules. So that sort of became a self-fulfilling prophecy on the part of this administration. This administration doesn't understand technology programs. They really don't. They're all lawyers, almost to a person, and they really don't understand what it takes in order to run a coherent and well-managed program and keep it on schedule. And they're making up stories about what's wrong with the Constellation program rather than looking at reality.
Do you think that there's a specific agenda associated with this administration and a preference for energy technologies that he's already focused on those and often running like a train going down the track?
Well, this administration on the energy side of things definitely does not like nuclear, in spite of what they professed with their loan guarantees. That's a whole different subject. Again, that's a red herring, in my opinion. They want somehow to have these so-called green energies, energy systems that are totally uneconomic unless the taxpayer pays through the nose in order to support them, or the ratepayer pays through the nose to support them. I think the basic motivation of this administration is they don't want America to be great.
I know that you do not agree with the diagnosis